Enough time on this bench teaches you that people do not always arrive in court carrying only what the paperwork describes. On paper, it might be a parking citation, a broken lease, a red light violation, a return check, or some minor civic irritation that can be expressed in dollars and dispatched with a stamp. But in real life, people often walk into a courtroom bearing things that paper was never designed to hold. They carry fear, they carry grief, they carry arrogance so thoroughly polished it passes for confidence. They carry desperation arranged to resemble explanation. And occasionally, once in a long while, someone arrives carrying a life so cushioned by wealth and insulation that even the smallest encounter with accountability feels to them like an act of persecution. That was what entered my courtroom on the morning Isabella Harrington appeared to answer for 3 unpaid parking tickets totaling $240. Let me tell you something. After 35 years on this bench in Providence, a municipal file does not impress me. 3 parking citations on the same block during the same week is not legendary material. It is ordinarily the kind of matter that closes in minutes. A few questions, the fine imposed, perhaps something reduced if the facts support it, and then the next person steps forward with their folder and their explanation. But experience teaches you that the smallest files sometimes carry the loudest truths. Not because the dollar amount is significant, because human character has a way of disclosing itself most completely in moments that people mistakenly regard as too minor to matter. Inspector Quinn gave me a particular look when he placed Isabella's file on the bench. If you have observed me long enough, you know I trust my own instincts. But after all these years, I also trust Quinn's. He is not a dramatic person. He does not carry gossip. He does not add color to plain facts. He does not waste my time. When he gives me that particular nod, the one communicating that more is present here than the paper suggests, I pay attention. So before I even called the matter, I already understood I was not looking at an ordinary parking case. I did not yet know precisely why, but I knew enough to listen with care. When the clerk called Isabella Harrington's name, I heard the heels before I saw the face. Sharp, deliberate, expensive steps, the kind designed to be registered by the room. That alone communicated something. Some people enter a courtroom trying not to draw attention. They are embarrassed, uncertain, or afraid. Others enter announcing themselves. She was the second kind. She was in her late 20s, dressed with a precision that spoke of long practice. Every detail of her appearance had been considered and controlled by someone who had long understood that presentation functions as a form of authority. Her blazer fit without a crease. Her hair was arranged without a strand out of position. Her posture was not nervous or apologetic. It was rehearsed confidence, the variety that develops in rooms where people have spent years stepping back before you reach them. I gave her the same greeting I give everyone who stands before me. Good morning. How are you today? It was a plain question, but judges absorb considerable information from plain questions. You observe how people receive ordinary courtesy. You learn whether they experience politeness as a mutual exchange or as a service they are owed. Isabella looked at me with a very particular expression. I want to describe it accurately. It was not open hostility. It was something colder, something dismissive. The expression of a woman who had already concluded that the person speaking to her was an inconvenience rather than an authority. Fine, she said, only that, fine. No acknowledgement, no attempt to meet the room on basic human terms. I looked down at the file. 3 unpaid parking citations, all within the same week, all on the same block. I asked whether the tickets were hers. She said her assistant generally handled these matters, and there had been a miscommunication. I have heard many variations of that sentence across many years. My accountant overlooked it. My husband manages this. My office coordinator misplaced it. My driver did not understand. A whole supporting cast of people appears to exist for the sole purpose of absorbing responsibility on behalf of those who have decided that direct consequences are beneath them. I told her very gently that whoever usually managed such things, she was standing here now, and we were going to work through it together. That was when she placed both manicured hands on the podium and delivered the sentence that transformed the entire room. "Judge," she said, "I think you should know who my father is before we proceed any further." People imagine moments like that produce immediate anger in me. They do not. Anger is not the first response. The first response is disappointment, deep disappointment, because that sentence almost always carries the same invisible second half. It means that before you apply the same standard to me as to anyone else, you should understand why I am not anyone else. It means perhaps we can skip the portion where accountability functions normally. It means there is an established order, and she is informing me of her position within it. I set my pen down and folded my hands. I told her I was certain her father was a fine person, but in my courtroom, my interest was in her. She tilted her head fractionally and said, "My father is Governor Harrington." The silence in the room was immediate and complete. Not theatrical silence, not performed. The genuine kind that descends when everyone present understands that a test has just begun and no one yet knows which direction it will turn. I heard Quinn shift position behind me. I heard someone in the gallery stop turning pages. I saw a woman waiting with her own file raise her eyes with the particular sharpness that appears when people believe they are about to witness the law accommodate someone in public. My father came to this country from Italy carrying very little beyond his labor, his dignity, and a refusal to allow either to be taken from him. He taught me that genuine respect is built, not inherited. Real authority is earned, not announced. Real worth cannot be transferred through a surname. I thought of him in that moment. I thought of every person who had stood before me with no assistant, no carefully assembled appearance, no powerful parent, and had still answered for themselves with more grace than this young woman had yet produced. And I thought that this moment mattered, not because she was the governor's daughter, because she may have been shielded from exactly this kind of moment for the entirety of her life. So I asked her whether she understood what those 3 tickets actually represented. She answered immediately, $240. There it was again, the language of transaction, the assumption that because everything in her world is resolved through management, value must always compress into price. "No," I said, and I allowed the word to occupy the space long enough to matter. They represent 3 separate choices, 3 separate days on which you parked where you understood you should not, 3 separate decisions not to address the consequences. That answer reached her. I could observe it reach her. People assume self-reflection always arrives with ceremony. It often begins as a flicker, a small interruption in the expression someone wears for the world. I saw that flicker, so I decided to widen it. I asked her to tell me something about her life, not about her father, about her. That question genuinely surprised her. It is remarkable how often people who have been surrounded by power are addressed only in reference to their family name, their title, or their usefulness to someone else's image. She blinked. For the first time that morning, she did not appear impatient. She appeared unprepared. She told me she worked for her father's foundation on youth literacy programs. I will be honest. That surprised me, not because families with resources do not engage in philanthropic work. Many do. But because I had already begun constructing a particular picture of Isabella in my mind, and that detail interrupted it. Human beings do that. They disrupt the simple conclusions we are forming about them. A judge who cannot allow that interruption will eventually stop seeing people altogether. I told her that literacy work was meaningful. Something shifted again when I said it. She said her father held high expectations for her. She had been moving between 3 cities during the past month. The tickets, she admitted, looked poor. She understood that. Her schedule had been impossible. Then she stopped herself and said it sounded like an excuse. "Busy does not park the car," I said. "You do." Quinn produced a sound behind me that was very carefully not a laugh. The room softened slightly. Then the back door opened. Governor Harrington entered my courtroom and took a seat quietly in the gallery. No announcement, no entourage filling the center aisle, no theatrical entrance. He simply sat down. That registered with me immediately. He did not move forward to identify himself, did not pass a note forward, did not request a sidebar, did not interrupt the proceeding. He sat and watched. Isabella did not know he was present. Her back was to him. In that moment, I understood something important. He was not there to protect her. He was there to observe who she would choose to be when she believed she was standing alone. I made the decision not to alert her to his presence. Some lessons cannot be delivered directly. They have to be encountered honestly. So I asked her another question. When she had said I should know who her father was, what had she actually intended by that? The room went still again. That question performed more work than any lecture I might have offered. It required her to hear herself, to translate entitlement out of implication and into explicit language. She was quiet for longer than before. Then she said quietly, "I think I meant that I am accustomed to things being managed for me. And is that serving you well?" I asked. That was the longest silence of the morning. Not hostile silence, thoughtful silence. You could almost feel the machinery of self-justification attempting to decide whether to resume operation or step aside. Then she said something that affected me more than all the references to her father, and all the polished certainty had irritated me. "No," she said, "not really." That single answer contained more courage than everything she had said up to that point. Honesty in public, particularly for people who have spent years buffered by status, is often genuinely frightening. I looked at the tickets again. 3 parking violations, $240. An ordinary case made less ordinary by one honest admission. I am accustomed to not managing things myself, and that is not helping me become who I ought to be. So I made my ruling. I told her she would pay the fines in full. No reduction. The law still carried weight. Accountability does not dissolve because reflection begins. But I also asked her to do something additional. I asked her to spend 1 day volunteering at the Providence Community Center. Not as the governor's daughter, not through a foundation, not at a ribbon cutting or a scheduled public appearance. As an ordinary person doing ordinary work alongside ordinary people. Sorting, shelving, listening, helping. She looked at me and asked whether that was a sentence or a request. I smiled at that question because it told me exactly what I needed to know. She had registered the distinction. She understood that I was not attempting to humiliate her. I was extending an invitation into a reality she may not have entered honestly in a very long time. "It is a request," I said, "because you are not simply a case number to me. You are a person. And I think you already know what the right answer is." She said yes. Then she gathered her papers and turned. That was when she saw her father in the 3rd row. She stopped where she stood. He rose, walked toward her, and placed one hand on her shoulder. He did not rescue her. He did not explain anything away. He did not perform outrage on her behalf. He simply stood there as a father who had allowed his daughter to face something real and had watched her choose honesty over position. He looked at me and nodded. I nodded back. Then they walked out together. Afterward, Quinn came to the bench and said that was going to appear in the news. He was probably right. Governor's daughter, municipal court, a quiet moment of public accountability. People recognize a headline when they encounter one. But what mattered to me was not whether the story would travel. What mattered was whether it had reached the place it needed to reach. 3 months later, a handwritten letter arrived at the courthouse. Not on foundation letterhead, not on embossed stationery, plain paper. It was from Isabella. She wrote that she had completed the volunteer day at the Providence Community Center. She had spent the morning sorting books alongside a retired teacher named Margaret, who came in every week despite arthritis because the children depended on her. Isabella wrote that she had paid the fines, but more importantly, she had been thinking about what I had said, about choices, about how many of her own had been made through habit rather than intention. She wrote that her father had seen the footage from my courtroom and told her I had reminded him why he had entered public service in the first place. I read that letter twice, and I thought about something my father used to tell me. He used to say that the world will always offer people pathways to become less than themselves, less humble, less truthful, less grateful, less aware of the labor and difficulty that make their comforts possible. The work of a decent adult is to resist that erosion, to notice when it begins and step back from it before it hardens into character. That is what I believe happened to Isabella Harrington, not a transformation, not a miracle produced in a single hearing. Life is not that simple, but perhaps a correction, a real moment in which no one could remove the difficulty for her. And she discovered that surviving accountability did not diminish her. It clarified her. People ask me regularly what this work has taught me. They assume the lessons are legal, procedural, technical. Those matter, of course. But the deeper ones are almost always human. Here is one of them. People are rarely improved by humiliation, but they can be changed by being seen clearly and addressed honestly. Another, fairness is not the same as uniformity. Applying identical treatment to everyone regardless of circumstance is not wisdom. It is indifference disguised as principle. And another, some of the most significant moments in a courtroom occur when the person standing before you realizes that the title, the family name, the role, or the polished exterior cannot perform the moral work on their behalf. I also think about Governor Harrington when this case comes back to me. Whatever anyone's politics may be, and I have never had any interest in converting this bench into a political platform, I respected what he did that morning. He did not contact my office. He did not seek any special arrangement. He did not work to smooth the path ahead of his daughter. He came, sat in the gallery, and allowed her to face her choices. That is not weakness in a parent. That is discipline. That is love mature enough to understand that protecting a child from every consequence eventually leaves the child without the capacity to navigate the world honestly. And that was the real story all along. Not the governor, not the tickets, not even the implication that a surname might carry more weight than a municipal file. The real story was whether a young woman raised inside a powerful name could answer for herself when the name stopped speaking for her. On that morning, for at least one honest moment, she could. I know some people would say I should have been harder. Others would say the fine should have been reduced because she was ultimately candid. Both instincts miss the point. The purpose of judging is not to indulge your irritation or your tenderness. It is to serve justice. In that moment, justice required that the law still cost something, and that the person before me be asked to become more genuinely awake to the lives her circumstances allowed her to overlook. That is why the fine remained and the volunteer day was requested, not punishment for its own sake, not mercy for its own sake. Judgment. That is the distinction between a court and a processing machine. About a week after the hearing, Quinn came into chambers with a folded note and the particular expression that tells me something has happened worth knowing. "You may want to see this," he said. The note was from the director of the Providence Community Center, short, handwritten, and direct. "Judge," it said, "she came. No cameras, no staff, no car waiting at the curb. She stayed the entire day. I later learned what that day had looked like. She arrived 10 minutes early, wearing clothes plain enough that they appeared almost uncomfortable on her. Not theatrical, not disheveled, simply ordinary. She introduced herself not as Isabella Harrington from the governor's office, not as an officer of a foundation, but simply as Isabella. The center director, a woman named Denise, with the practical and undemonstrative kindness that keeps communities functioning, put her to work in the donation room. No ceremony, no acknowledgement of who her father was. Just tasks, sorting winter coats, breaking down boxes, labeling canned goods, carrying crates of books to the reading room. At first, Denise told me later, Isabella moved like someone waiting to be excused from the situation. Each task seemed to surprise her with its weight and its indifference to her identity. Tape adhered to her hands. Dust settled on her blazer. A box split open because she had lifted it incorrectly. An elderly volunteer named Margaret corrected her technique on stacking books by reading level 3 separate times. Each correction, Denise said, arrived like a small lesson in a language Isabella had never been required to learn. Then around noon, a little girl named Elena came in with her grandmother for the after-school literacy program. She could not have been more than 8 years old, hair in 2 uneven braids, a backpack larger than her frame, shoelaces untied. Elena saw Isabella crouching beside a half-unpacked box of donated children's books and asked whether she worked there. Isabella hesitated briefly, then said, "Today I do." The child asked her to help locate a chapter book about horses. Isabella spent 15 minutes sorting through boxes with Elena kneeling on the floor beside her in a room that smelled of old paper and radiator heat. Denise told me she watched from the doorway and saw, perhaps for the first time that day, Isabella stop performing adulthood and begin participating in it. She laughed when Elena rejected one book because the horse on the cover looked unfriendly. She listened while Margaret explained which titles disappeared from the shelves first, because children wanted stories featuring characters who looked like themselves. She carried snack trays to the tutoring room. She wiped down the tables afterward. At some point, she stopped tracking the time. Late in the afternoon, Denise asked if she wanted to leave a little early since the formal requirement had been satisfied. Isabella said no. She remained while one of the center's teenage volunteers described trying to finish his homework before his grocery store shift began. She stayed while Margaret rubbed her arthritic fingers and recounted 37 years of teaching second grade in the public schools. She remained long enough to understand that service was not a speech, a board appointment, or a fundraising event. It was repetition, presence, returning to a place where no one was obliged to acknowledge you. A second note arrived the following week. This one was from Margaret herself, written in large, careful handwriting. She wrote that she did not know what had brought the governor's daughter to the center, but she hoped whatever it was would bring her back. She worked hard once she stopped getting in her own way, Margaret wrote, and for someone raised with every advantage she had, she listened better than I expected. Don't let that make you soft, Judge. I am just telling you what I saw. That sentence made me laugh out loud in chambers. Margaret had no idea how closely it aligned with my own way of thinking. Justice is never improved by sentimentality, but it is frequently sharpened by accurate observation. About a month later, the governor sent a brief handwritten note on plain stationery. No meeting requested, no request for any conversation about any matter before the court. He thanked the court for treating his daughter not harshly and not indulgently, but truthfully. He wrote that public life had taught him many things, but among the most difficult was that children raised near power often confused proximity with substance. He said he had spent years ensuring Isabella had opportunities and had perhaps neglected to ensure she had sufficient unfiltered encounters with consequence. I appreciated the honesty in that sentence more than any polished statement his office could have produced. Months passed. Cases arrived and were resolved. A city never exhausts its reasons to send people through a courtroom. But Isabella's file remained closer to the surface of my thinking than I expected. Then, just before the winter holidays, she appeared again, not as a defendant. She sat in the back row during another session and waited until the docket had emptied. Then she approached the bench in an empty room. No designed entrance this time, nothing announcing itself in her steps. She told me she had continued going to the community center every other Saturday, not because I had directed her to, because she found she was calmer there than nearly anywhere else in her life. She said that for the first time, she understood what it meant to be useful without being visible. That phrase stayed with me. Useful without being visible. Many people spend entire careers and considerable resources never learning the value of that distinction. I asked her what had shifted. She considered the question for a long moment before answering. Then she said, "I think I spent most of my life being arranged, handled, positioned, managed. Everything looked complete from the outside, but I had almost no practice being responsible for ordinary things. At the center, none of that context existed. If I did not lift the box remained where it was. If I did not show up, the work still needed doing. It was strangely relieving." Then she added, "The tickets embarrassed me, but not because of the money, because for the first time I heard myself the way other people must hear me." That is a difficult moment for anyone. I respected her for not turning away from it. When she left, I thought again of my father and something he used to say. He used to say that there are two kinds of humiliation in life: the kind other people attempt to impose on you, and the useful kind that arrives when truth finally strips away your vanity. The first kind diminishes. The second can preserve you if you allow it. I believe what happened in my courtroom was the second kind. Not because I intended to humble her for entertainment, but because truth spoken plainly can require a person to reintroduce herself to her own conscience. That is the quiet work of judging. Not every case permits it. Many do not. But on the days when it is possible, and this was one of them, the courtroom becomes more than a place where fines are imposed. It becomes a room where a person's life is briefly interrupted by honesty. And sometimes that interruption is enough to redirect a future. That is why I continue to believe, after all these years, that justice requires not only rules and records, but attention. Attention to tone and habit, to what is genuinely being asked for, to what kind of person is standing in front of you, and to whether the law applied with care might not only address a wrong choice, but illuminate a better one. That is what I hope occurred for Isabella Harrington. Not absolution, not overnight transformation, only the beginning of a harder and more truthful way of standing in the world. And if that happened, even in part, then a file worth $240 performed more genuine work than many cases 10,000 times its size. That is enough for me.